Hello everyone, welcome to my video number 2 of this series where I am making a memory style quilt that is blocks on point with sashing. And so I thought I'd video my progress throughout this quilt, and today is video number 2. So I've spent the morning stabilizing all of my pieces, and so you can see this is my progress so far. All of my clothing has the fusible fused on to the back. I have 3 stacks of clothing here, and this big stack is going to be my 10.5-inch squares. This stack here is going to be my triangles that go around the perimeter of my quilt, and this stack of clothing here is 4 pieces will be my corner triangles. And so this is where I'm at. I just put away the iron. I spent a good while fusing on a stabilizer onto these clothing pieces. So this stack should go by pretty quick because we are just using a 10-inch square ruler and a rotary cutter and cutting these blocks to 10.5 by 10.5. Then I think I'm going to have to maybe do some math. I'm not quite sure, to cut these into half square triangles with a seam allowance. And then these 4 pieces will be the corner triangles, and so I'm not quite sure how to approach these pieces yet. I'm going to go ahead and cut these into 10.5-inch squares and then see if I have to do anything different when cutting these triangles. I don't know. I'm not quite sure yet. So I'll go ahead and cut these out, and once I figure out how to cut out my triangles and my corner triangles, we'll come back and I'll show you how to cut these out. And if you have to do anything special, it's been a while since I did a quilt on point. I know that if you are making a quilt on point and you're going by a pattern, they usually give you measurements to cut a big square and then cut that into quarter square triangles, giving you 4 corners. And then they also give you measurements for cutting a larger square out of fabric and then cutting that in half to give you your half square triangles. This quilt is going to be a little bit different because she gave me little pieces of clothing and designated where they go in the quilt, and so I'm going to have to figure out these 2 measurements. But we'll come back after this is done and I've figured out where I'm cutting these pieces. So that's where I am today, and I just thought I'd bring you along and maybe we'll learn something together. It's been a while since I've done a quilt like this, and I can't quite remember off the top of my head. So we're going to do some refreshing of memory today. I'm back now, and I have all of my 10-inch squares cut 10.5 by 10.5 square. Lots and lots and lots of squares. So now we're ready to go ahead and cut our half square triangles that are going to go on all of the 4 sides of our quilt all the way around. So I think I was totally overthinking this. My mind is in overdrive these last few days. So let me show you how I'm going to cut my half square triangles for these set triangles around the perimeter of the quilt. So here are my 10.5 by 10.5-inch squares. Here is the first half square triangle that I cut, and we're going to cut one of these together. And I'm going to be using my OmniGrid 10.5-inch ruler to do this. So you don't need any special triangle rulers to accomplish a half square triangle with this ruler. So the first thing we want to do is take a careful look at the ruler, and it's going to be hard to see these black lines that go from corner to corner, directly in the corner to directly in the corner. That is directly in the half of your 10.5-inch square. You'll notice this other set, or this other line that runs from corner to corner, is a little bit offset. See, here's the corner and here's where the line starts. Let me show you this line that's directly in the middle of this point. So you need to make sure to pay attention to that because we don't want to cut these incorrectly. Using the line that goes from diagonal to diagonal but is offset will give you your 1/4 inch seam allowance that is needed in order to piece your blocks together. So we're going to be working with this side, which is slightly a 1/4 inch larger than if we were to cut from using this line. I'm sorry, it's hard to explain, but if you take a good look at your ruler, pull one out, you'll notice the 2 lines that run diagonal across your ruler. One comes to the point and one is off center. And this is the half that gives you your 1/4 inch seam allowance. So the first thing really we need to do with all of these odd shaped pieces is take this larger triangle and figure out exactly where we want to cut our triangle out of our fabric. So I'm just going to play with the placement, and right here we would be lined up this line here. I know it's going to be really hard to see. This would be my half square triangle. So the first thing I want to do is go ahead and mark. Can't find a pen anywhere close by, so I'm going to use a Sharpie, but don't use a Sharpie on your fabrics. This is going to be cut off anyway. It's just a reference mark. I'm going to go ahead and make a mark off of the fabric to the side where I want to make a straight cut. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and remove this ruler for a second. I'm going to line this mark up to the lines on my mat, and I'm just going to make my first cut, which is just a straight cut, just like this. Let's go ahead and do that. All right, so there is our straight cut. Now we can bring this back. We have our straight cut here. Remember to use the line that is not in the center. It's slightly off center. And we're going to take that line and we're going to line it up to the straight cut that we just made. Nice and straight, just like that. There's our line. And now we can take our rotary cutter and cut these 2 diagonal lines. So there's 1, and there's 2. And now that is our perfect half square triangle. And let's go ahead and check the measurement of that, just to double check our work. We can now take the set of line, or the diagonal line that runs right in that point. Let's see, let's line that up just like this. Line these edges up just like that, and you'll see from corner to corner, this that overhangs this line is your 1/4 inch seam allowance. You might not be able to see that, but there you go. So that is how I'm going to cut my set in triangles for the perimeter of my quilt. And there's 2. I have, let's see, like 16 left to cut. So we'll come back after those are done and we will do the 1/4 square triangles that go in the corner. And I'm back now. I have all of my 10.5 inch squares cut. I now have all of my half square triangles for the sides of my quilt. And now it's time to cut the 4 corners, and that would be the 1/4 square triangles. So let me show you how I have approached cutting these 1/4 square triangles from scraps of clothing. First, we're going to start with our 10.5 inch ruler, and we're going to cut out a 10.5 inch square. So let's pick this piece of clothing. This is a piece of clothing for one of the corners. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure the little stripes are straight in my square. Just like that. And we can cut this square out. If you have the little gloves to wear so that you don't cut yourself, that would be really, really handy. I'm going to pause this so I can go ahead and cut this square out without cutting myself. Okay, now my square is cut out and I did not have to worry about cutting my fingers. So here is our square. The next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and mark the piece that I want to use as my quarter square triangle. And you may or may not need to do that, and I'll show you why I do that. Is because she was very specific on which parts of the clothing she wanted to use, and so it helps me remember when I'm cutting apart this square, I don't want to make any mistakes because I only have one of these pieces of clothing. So now I know I'm going to be using this piece as my quarter square triangle. So the very next thing that I like to do is go ahead and take a straight edge ruler. I'm going to draw a diagonal line from corner to corner, directly on point, right in that corner. And this time I'm using a disappearing pen that just disappears with heat. And I'll flip it around and do another diagonal line from the other set of corners. Just dark enough for me to see. You might not be able to see that. Okay, I still know that this is going to be my corner right here. And so now I can use the lines on my ruler and the lines that I've just provided to cut my quarter square triangle with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So are you confused yet? So now I'm going to line up this red line, which you might not be able to see, with the 1/4 inch line on my straight edge ruler, just like this. So you might be able to see that now where we're going to be cutting along this edge of the ruler, it's offset on this corner by 1/4 inch. Just like that. So let me bring you up closer. Maybe you can see that. The red line was directly in that point, and now we've cut it over 1/4 inch. And now we can make our second cut, just like this. Again, lining the red line that we created from the point with the 1/4 inch mark on the ruler. And just like that, we have our quarter square triangle for our corners. So now maybe this will make sense. Let me bring in some pieces. So we have our quilt that will go like this. Here's 2 of our blocks side by side. Let's get it where you can see in the frame. So this will be my row that's going across. We can even show you how this will be like that, right? So now the quarter square triangle, we will flip so that the long edge goes just like this in that corner. And then our half square triangles, the larger ones, will go right in there. So those are the edges of my quilt. Ta-da! I think I made that way more complicated than it really needed to be. So I have, let's see, 1 more of these to cut, and then I'm going to go ahead and put all these pieces up on the wall, and I'll show you a glimpse of what this quilt will look like, and then I'm off to the fabric store because we are adding sashing to this quilt. And here we are with all the pieces pinned up on the wall. Of course, they're not all straight. They're just pinned up there just to help me get a good visual of how the quilt's going to go. At this point, I can send a picture over to my client and just verify that This is, of course, all of the places that she wants her squares to be. Maybe she wants to swap pieces around. But it gives you a good idea of what the quilt's going to look like. And it'll help me keep myself in order when I begin to add the sashing, which I'm going to go by right after I'm done filming this video. But this is where we are so far. I think that's going to be great. Okay, this is it for today's video. I'm off to do some fabric shopping, and we will see you tomorrow.